Wibanga, ayanga, wibanga, ayanga, wibanga.
Ever since Alaska was purchased from Russia in 1867, the issue of Native Alaskan land rights sizzled to a boil until it could no longer be contained in 1971, when the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, better known as the ANCSA, was finally put into law. Due to conflicts caused by the increase in Alaska's settler population, American claims to native ancestral lands, and inadequate land settlement options, the ANCSA was formed as a suitable solution that has preserved native culture for more than 45 years.
When America first obtained Alaska, it was mostly neglected, and not many settlers inhabited the land.
Even so, there were traders and hunters that approached Alaska land with the intent of benefiting from the territory, interfering with the Alaska Native ways of life.
During this time period, the Organic Act was drafted to govern the fledgling territory of Alaska. The act included a small administrative branch, a court system, and even a school system. However, the Organic Act had a significant flaw. It did not give Alaskan natives clear title to their land. It merely promised that Congress would protect their land rights, which, according to past experiences, was not a very reliable oath. The lack of protection for land rights were not much of a problem in the 1880s, when only a few thousand settlers inhabited Alaska.
However, in the 1890s, gold was discovered in the Klondike region of Alaska, causing the population of white settlers to skyrocket, surpassing native villagers for the first time ever in the year 1900. But the population growth didn't end there. In 1967, an enormous supply of oil was discovered in Prudhoe Bay, which soon became known as the largest oil field in North America.
In order to transfer the oil to the market, the state needed to build a massive pipeline from the North Slope to Valdez.
The biggest obstacle preventing the oil industry from obtaining this goal were the Alaskan Native claims to this land.
Fear of the increasing white settler population and oil company speculation of Alaska caused Native Americans to try to defend their Aboriginal land rights. This drive to defend their territory was especially powerful in 1959, when Alaska became a state, and therefore was given rights to 104 million acres of federal lands. The land selection process was a frenzy of uncoordinated taking of land by the state of Alaska and oil companies without consulting native tribes. Faced with the threat of lost land to an increasing population and land speculation, Alaska natives knew they had to do something to protect the land of their ancestors.
There were 4 different ways the natives could go about protecting their land. The first suggestion was reservations under the existing Indian Reorganization Act, which had already put 1,000 or so Indians on reservations previously. However, due to the history of broken treaties between the American government and natives on reservations, the Alaska natives were not inclined to be put on reservations.
The second option was to have the natives settle their land disputes in the U.S. Court of Claims, as suggested by Senator Ernest Gruening. However, there were 2 significant issues with this suggestion. First of all, the settled land disagreements in the Court of Claims would take far too long, just as it did in the Tlingit and Haida court case. This court case was filed in 1935 regarding the 1905 Tongass National Forest, which had been built on Tlingit land without their permission. It was not until 1959 that the issue was finally settled, and the Tlingit tribe was paid $7.5 million for the land lost, although compensation was not actually received until 1968. The second issue through settling land disputes through the Court of Claims is that the court did not have the authority to grant legal title to the lands owned, only compensation for lands lost. The native tribes did not want compensation. They wanted their land.
The third way the natives could earn title to their land was by letting the state finish selecting land first and then gaining title through the state government, not the federal government. This was not ideal to the natives because they did not want the state to get the first pick. The last and most tedious option to go through was Congress. However, it was the only solution the natives were willing to partake in. In the words of Robert D. Arnold, it
could be the most rewarding or most damaging of the 4 alternatives.
The most difficult part about going through Congress was the lack of organization between native tribes, rendering them a weak voice compared to the rest of Alaska.
The road to a successful compromise began with the formation of the Alaska Federation of Natives. The first meeting consisted of more than 400 delegates from 17 smaller organizations. By uniting, they created a powerful political force capable of breaking the 400-year tradition of betrayal of native tribes by American settlers.
When the AFN had their first meeting, they had to come up with a settlement that satisfied both large and small tribes, as well as tribes with few resources and many resources. After much debate, they decided $500 million was fair for disbanding claims to nearly all of Alaska for only 40 million acres, of their choice, of course. Their last and most important demand was a land freeze on selections of acreage in Alaska. This froze the division of the state until the claims of natives were settled.
This put immense pressure on Congress to come up with a compromise, because oil companies had paid the state of Alaska $900 million to drill the land in Alaska, and 90% of the revenues Alaska earned came from the oil drilling. With this land freeze, neither the oil companies nor the state of Alaska could earn dividends from their investments. Soon, Congress began to debate on the land settlement bill. Initially, the solutions Congress proposed were not to the AFN's liking. Alaska Native delegates began to fear that they would not be paid a substantial amount for the lands lost. However, on July 8, 1970, President Nixon delivered an address supporting the Indians' rights to their ancestral lands, giving the Alaska Federation of Natives proposal an advantage. He declared,
The special relationship between Indians and the federal government is the result of solemn obligations which have been entered into by the United States government. To terminate this relationship would be no more appropriate than to terminate the citizenship rights of any other American.
After this statement, the conservatives of House of Representatives and the Senate were willing to pass two generous resolutions for the ANCSA. The House promised 40 million acres of land, in accordance with the demands of the AFN, and $425 million in compensation. The Senate proposed $500 million in compensation from the federal government, as well as 50 million acres of land, 20 million of which can be used for hunting, fishing, and so on, but not entirely owned. They both decided that the state should pay $500 million to Native tribes from the mineral revenues of the state. However, only the Senate's bill included the mineral revenue sharing the AFN wanted. Finally, on December 16, 1971, a compromise bill was signed by President Nixon, providing $962.5 million in compensation for lost lands, as well as 40 million acres to 12 regional Native corporations, which was eventually extended to 13, adding a corporation for Alaska Natives living outside of Alaska. Each regional corporation would earn minerals for revenues on their soil, not the shared revenues the AFN wanted. Despite this, the ANCSA was one of the most successful compromises between American Indians and the government, creating a whole new system for U.S.-Indian relations.
This new system was based off of self-governing corporations and not debilitating reservations. Former Chairman Jeff Anderson describes these institutions.
Native corporations today in Alaska are very diverse. They're involved in construction, they're involved in environmental assessment, they're involved in legal situations, multitude of opportunities.
These opportunities were made possible because the total $962.5 million in compensation the Alaska Natives received was divided up amongst
stockholders, village corporations, and regional corporations. For the first 5 years, 45% of earnings went to regional corporations, and 45% went to village corporations. The last 10% of funds were divided amongst Native investors. The dividends from investments and compensation funds from the Settlement Act are now divided half and half between village corporations and regional corporations. All compensation the corporations receive are tax-exempt. However, capital gains are not. Out of this system, Alaskan village life has been preserved, and Native Alaskan companies have overall improved the life of stockholders by providing them with dividends and services. Patricia Atkinson, one of our interviewees, describes her experience under the Sea Alaska Corporation.
Some of the benefits I have experienced as a result include scholarships from my corporation to help advance my post-secondary education, workshops and training related to Alaska history and cultures, and connections with professional and personal associations growing out of these experiences that have enriched my career.
Because Native Alaskans have finally obtained the right to their land, their customs and autonomy have remained, and will remain, intact for generations to come.
Yeah.